Well, in the final episode of season 2 of Masterclass with Utpal Seth, where we focused on creative destruction, we look at some more nuances: value fragmentation, value concentration, with examples of winner takes it all. And in the final episode, we'll also once again summarize the whole concept of creative destruction. So we've established some great examples, Mr. Seth, as to what is value migration in the context of terminal value investing, what is wealth creation, what really is the most important moving part for an investor when you are looking at value. But value fragmentation, how does that fit in?
So Nikunj, the value migration that we talked about and the value shifts are all happening at a much faster pace that we've established. For example, there is this fund called ARC. They have assessed that the impact by the year 2025 on the global GDP of artificial intelligence is 6 to 8% of the world GDP. That's a massive number. That is not the annual growth rate of the world GDP, right? So we know that the quantum of impact is massive. However, every sector and every new technology or every innovation goes through a evolution or a curve, as we discussed before. In the initial phase of that curve, you will find a lot of players entering into that space or attempting to enter into that space. That leads to what we call as value dispersion or value fragmentation in that space. So while initially significant value is created, but that value creation is spread across many number of players. If you remember the 2000 tech bubble,
Yes.
there were so many companies which got valued at absurd multiples, but eventually mortality rate was high, and all that value which was destroyed migrated, and not just migrated but also multiplied amongst those who were the leaders and the survivors of that bust, right. So this is the process of value dispersion or value fragmentation, as you called it. This process is followed by value concentration. To put it in statistical terms, you have a fat head and a long tail. The long tail is the value dispersion part and the fat head is the value concentration part. This is a natural corollary of creative destruction. This is a natural corollary of capitalism itself. That is how capital allocation process leads to most efficient use of resources in an economy. One must embrace this. If you see value dispersion in the context of Indian telecom sector, go back in time and in 2015 to 17, how many players were there? And all of them were fighting for their respective share. Today, how many players are there? And what is the share of the top 2 players? It's amply clear that value concentration has taken place. Value dispersion in initial stages is also when the discipline of capital allocation is lax for a new sector. Everybody is trying to find the next big thing, right? And in that process, the men are separated from the boys, and then value gets concentrated with the men. value concentration, as we see, happens over time and across sectors. But value concentration has an extreme form as well. That extreme form is what we call as winner takes most or winner takes all model. When does value concentration take that extreme form? Like today, it's evident that Nvidia at $3 odd trillion market cap, it has become 100x in the last 7 years. That is value creation at an unprecedented pace. And where is the second and the third player in that space? They are fractions of Nvidia. This is winner takes all in its most extreme form.
So the beginning of a curve, which is, let's say you identified a trend, you know this is going to be big. And in Indian context, let's say you are calling EV as a big trend. It's right now what could be called as a rage. How does one know that out of the dozen companies which are planning to move there, which are the ones who will survive?
So we were talking about how Netflix formed Blockbuster. But today, that is also changing. Streaming is the name of the game for Netflix. Netflix says that my competition is sleep, right? Which is a very clever way of defining the fight for attention. But if you break up the population into different generations, let's say Gen Z, Millennials, Gen X and the baby boomers, you will find increasingly that the newer generations have already shifted to short video rather than streaming. The proportion of time that Gen Z is spending on short video is much higher than what baby boomers are. So over the next 10-20 years, we will find value migrating from streaming to short videos. Will Netflix be able to adapt? Is the question. As an investor, if you do not want to answer that question, then you are better off moving towards the short video opportunities if you can find them. So all I am saying is that value destruction can happen to anyone at any time, and value migration will be led by where the customer is shifting. Okay. We were talking about winner takes all. When these shifts happen, the one who is leading the new space will create disproportionate value. Just like Netflix became the king of its turf in streaming, I think the world is yet to see who is going to become the king of its turf in short videos. Not just that, let us take an example of electric vehicles. Globally, we are seeing Tesla and BYD become respectively dominant players, but in India, we are still in a very nascent stage. The winners are not yet determined. So we are probably in the value dispersion phase right now, and over time, we will move towards value concentration phase. Now, who will be the men out of the players today remains to be seen, but I think there are early signals about what are the capabilities that you would look for in those men who are going to make the difference.
You spoke about winner takes it all, and again your favorite example, Eric Smith. In the short term we overestimated, in the long term we underestimated. Winner takes it all is a concept where we underestimate what the winning pot perhaps could look like. In any sector, when you have a sizable market share of 55 to 60%, the advantage which you will enjoy in terms of market cap, recognition, P multiple, profitability and customer satisfaction, I guess is going to be supreme.
Of course. However, Nikunj, we are talking about the end point there where you have 55-60% market share. But as an investor, you will have to move prior to that, right, and see where your incremental market share and your incremental return on capital employed is disproportionate, right, and accordingly you have to invest. So, what makes the difference of whether an industry consolidation is going to go to an extreme in where winner takes most or winner takes all? It's actually the cost curve. It's actually what is the marginal cost for each unit, and that determines how extreme the leadership in that space can get. So, we were talking about global examples, right. During COVID, Zoom was a boon. Zoom had far greater market share than Microsoft Teams had. But over a period of time, look at how it evolved. Microsoft Teams has taken disproportionate market share, and Zoom is now actually playing catch up. So, despite the initial spike that Zoom's market cap had, thereafter there was a tremendous destruction in the value of Zoom, whereas Microsoft kept on going from strength to strength, not just because of Microsoft Teams, but for many other things. So, one must recognize what are the inherent right to win, who has the inherent right to win in that space. And when you find that, and which is the word that we used in one of our earlier episodes, differentiated insight. When you get that differentiated insight as to who has the right to win here, you follow that.
So, in the concept of terminal value investing, where does value concentration fit in?
As I explained to you, value concentration happens over time.
Okay.
Right? So, for those who can see the direction of the value concentration earlier, they are able to perceive the terminal value better than others.
Okay.
And therefore, I mean, those who get that differentiated insight about who has the right to win will be able to invest better.
What is a great example locally or globally of value concentration when you say value is getting concentrated?
I think of the total value creation that has happened, total wealth creation that has happened in the US, 3 stocks have given 10% of the total wealth creation.
Wow.
In the US. There is a fantastic chart, and 72 stocks have given 50% of the lifetime wealth creation. So, you know, all you had to do was find those 3, but even if you couldn't find those 3, if you could find those 72, you're fine. I mean, out of the 3,000, 4,000 stocks listed in the US, you needed to find only those few. That is value concentration.
Would that apply in your investing career as well? Some of your famous investments have created large amount of wealth for you personally and for Rare, while the number of bets you must have taken could be significantly higher, but the large part of wealth creation could be 50, could be 60, even 70% has only come in a handful of stocks.
That would be true not just for us, but also for every investor in their portfolio. You will find that, and which is why we say that when you are pursuing gorilla companies, initially let us say you had a portfolio of 20 companies and thinking that all of them were gorillas, but maybe 3-4 of them turned out to be gorillas, maybe 5-6 of them turned out to be monkeys, and you are unsure about the remaining. But those gorillas will keep outperforming the others. You will keep cleaning up the monkeys from your portfolio, and the uncertain ones will over a period of time become either gorillas or become monkeys, and that process will continue. So, over a long period of time, you will find that those gorilla stocks become disproportionate part of your portfolio as well, and that I think is what truly makes great investors compound over a long period of time. And
they say that diversification perhaps in asset allocation is important, but for some great investors that's not true. What is the importance for terminal value investor when it comes to portfolio concentration and asset allocation? Because when you have great companies, they'll keep on compounding and they'll keep on becoming larger companies for you as part of your portfolio. So as a terminal value investor, how do you know risk management and how do you do, what should I say, capital allocation?
okay, so Nikunj, let's keep investors aside for the time being.
Sure.
Let us look at the S&P 500. Today the top 7 stocks of S&P 500 represent more than 31% of the value of S&P 500.
Okay.
Just 7 stocks out of 500 stocks, right? Now, to answer your question about investors, there are some investors who are professional investors who have to be focused on relative performance. That's a different ball game. There are some investors who have the privilege of being focused on absolute returns. They are a different class of investors. It's wrong to compare the two. Those who are focused on absolute returns and long-term compounding, okay, will recognize the power of concentration.
Okay.
And diversification is supposed to reduce risk, but it's not concentration which is the source of risk in your portfolio.
Sure.
It is lack of differentiated insights, lack of understanding, or lack of knowledge and information which is the source of risk for you.
So once you identify your gorilla and once you identified the monkey, it is important to let the gorilla grow.
Yes. As they say, you should water the flowers and cut the weeds.
Yeah. Fantastic. Now, before we wrap this episode, we started with winner takes it all, and then we took it back to the whole process of by the time you become from small to mid and mid to large and large to mega. Winner takes it all. That's a phrase. It's a phrase that everybody can relate to. But the underlying meaning of this phrase for a terminal value investor is extraordinary. Whether it is mega trend, whether it is leadership, whether it is intangible, all of this entire framework leads to one thing. Who will be the winner, and the winner will take it all.
True. As I said, winner takes it all is an extreme form of value concentration. Let's summarize this whole discussion that we've been having on value migration in the context of terminal value investing. There are multiple opportunities that take place during a creative destruction cycle. Okay, and these are big shifts, long shifts. One must not worry if you lose one opportunity, okay, and you only need to find a few. You don't need to find too many. Even if you can't find those 3 that created 10% of lifetime value creation in the US, you can focus on the 72, right, and still participate in a lot of value creation, wealth creation, sorry. So, participate in this creative destruction process. Even if you miss one phase, participate in the next phase. There are multiple stages. The second is understand this process of value dispersion and value concentration. Avoid the value dispersion, focus on the value concentration. The third is recognize that there is a possibility of winner takes most or winner takes all based on the marginal cost curve in any such scenario. And when you find that, then you ride it to the hilt. Then there is no looking back. As Rameshji puts it, at that time you have to back up the truck. Right? This shift of terminal value becomes perceptible to a few much before the shift in earnings takes place. And therefore, the terminal value shift is captured in the multiples more than in the earnings. In your ET Now event at Taj Lands End, your 15th anniversary, when Manish and I were discussing, we talked about the terminal value of India, right? And maybe the higher multiples that we are seeing today are a reflection of such a value shift, reflecting the underlying changes which are not fully captured in the earnings shift so far. Okay? I will not deny that there are some elements of the market which seem to be overexcited, but the larger picture remains intact. This terminal value shift from the weak to the strong, from the rigid to the agile, that terminal value shift is the shift from losers to winners, and they are going to be separated by their adaptability and agility. Remember that this value migration can be within the sector or inter-sector. As an investor, it is your dharma to be in that part of the value chain which is leveraged most to this change and the pace of that change. And it will be really a travesty if you can identify that value shift, participate in it, but get off very early.
That is something we plan to discuss in the next season as well.
Yes.
Which is that they call as common errors, but once you've identified something, how do you really maximize on it? Well, all I can say is that the season 1 was an eye-opener. It was about learning. Season 2 was about understanding, and season 3 would be all about implementation. That once you identify the concept, once you've understood the concept of terminal value investing, once you understand the entire process, how the evolution happens, how can really maximize, and what are the real life application errors. But that is something which is coming up in the season 3. But it's been a pleasure again to have you as a anchor, as a student, and as somebody who's curious. I guess the last 2 seasons have been an eye-opener for me. So thank you for your time and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Nikunj. You are very kind.